Hello, I'm Lesley Riddoch and welcome to Referendum TV. On a sunny Monday morning, and on today's programme we have to discuss the polls, the health service. That'll be the polls, not the polls, the kind of genetic polls, but the other kind of ones that have actually been going quite a good way recently. The Guardian's Libby Brooks, Scotland's answer to Lady Gaga, that's Lady Alba, Dundee's Renaissance, and Mr. Comedy Phil Differ will all be amongst our guests. But first, just to say, because I keep forgetting to do it, but if you want to sort of join the crack, as it were, you can tweet us using the hashtag RefTV. And a big welcome to my co-presenter today, the fabulous, singing, well-dressed, straight from London, who can beat him, Pat Kane. So, as ever, we have a shufti at the papers today, and it's noticeable, actually. They're beginning to just, be perhaps just a little bit fair, actually. Here we have the Herald. It's looking at the polls that I was mentioning there. We're going to come on to them in a minute. Saying battle for votes intensifies as Yes camp gains ground. Interesting to see that the Riddoch papers also have a kind of, just a kind of tempered tone, perhaps you might say. Yes camp is boosted by 4-point jump in poll. That's referring to a YouGov poll that they did themselves. The Sun has got nothing on the front page. It's got a large spread here, which if I had 4 hands I would be able to show you. But its editorial is quite interesting. It says, all to play for, the opening line, sometimes it's possible to rub it in too much after a victory, as no campaigners are finding out. And the conclusion of it, when the game changes and swings so quickly, who knows what can happen in the month we've got left to the referendum? Well, that's very true. Meanwhile, back at the fort, some of the other papers, what have we got here? The Daily Mail is saying, Salmond, I will do better next time, which is referring to that debate the BBC will have on August the 25th. And he says he will explain the pound plan in the TV debate. That's the front page really on the Scotsman as well. Salmond, I should have done better on currency. But actually, most of the papers have got a completely different line on that question of the Plan B, Plan A currency thing, which is Alex Salmond saying, I won't show my hand before we negotiate. Alex basically saying, we're not really going to go through any more Plan B stuff. And personally speaking, I would say, thank goodness for that, because there's more to this referendum than currency, some of which we will be discussing. But what did you make of the polls there, the kind of slant on the different papers, Pat?
Well, obviously, as a yeser, a poll gives you a shot of joy in your heart of a morning, and a bad one sends you into a pit of despair. But I think to some extent the reason why you're seeing, say, the Murdoch papers doing it is because there is more excitement when it looks like the polls are going to be narrower, and it means it gives the political correspondents something to talk about. I would like to think it's the fond dream of most of the people in the movement that the polls are neither here nor there. If we at least get within shouting distance, that sends a message to the voter that says permission is allowed for you to think about voting yes. And if the movement has been as effective as we think it has, if the horizontal conversations are happening in every art and part of Scotland, and the people have been mobilised in a way that they never have been, if the hype is right, then the polls are interesting, but the victory might be bigger than we even believe. But I think there's a dynamic going on in the movement that is actually beyond most of the political calculus about what people's preferences are from being called down a phone or being accosted on the internet. I hope that there's going to be that moment where people are actually talking about power and themselves. So we'll see.
Aye. We'll see. Well, I mean, it's true, because I suppose actually I've spent most of my time, if I've been interviewed on the BBC or whatever, saying actually the polls were so wrong before the last 2 SNP victories, really right up to the last moment, that you can't suddenly claim comfort from polls if you've kind of not been too despondent about them in the past. But nonetheless, there's a trend happening. And also John Curtis, Prof. John Curtis, the psephologist of the parish, John has actually got a really interesting blog on today, which I'm just reading from, where he says, as a result of all these polls, he says, certainly it is now clear that the leaders' debate was not the damaging episode for the yes side that it originally appeared to be. And it looks, I think he's sort of looking at the polls today, let me just get to the top of this, and saying as well that he felt it didn't work when the original announcement was made that an independent Scotland wouldn't be allowed to share the pound. It looks as though the no side return to this issue since the leaders' debate has failed to impress voters and may even have backfired. So, lordy.
I think so. I mean, one of the interesting things about Salmon's apparent wimpiness, is that the right word to use, was that it could have been very well calculated to the extent that he's got an arrogant image to kind of live down and bear down upon. But I do think that, I was listening to the famous Alistair Darling interview with the New Statesman, where he sort of said, yes, it essentially said that yes, that he thought the SNP was a blood and soil nationalism. This is not a calm man. I think there's an element of Darling that can be riled and will be riled. And I think there's a way to get under his plates. I don't even know necessarily whether Salmon is the right person to do it. Nicola Sturgeon might have been the right person to do it. But I think in terms of telegenics, in terms of people communicating not necessarily the message, but the rhetoric and the emotion, I think that's actually quite a battleground. And I think when these two horn shows come to talk to each other, I think both of them will actually be calmer, because if you think about what happened to Nicola Sturgeon and Joanne Lamont after their first debate, which was the stereodrama, and after that it was basically Socratic dialogue, So I think both of them will be thinking, how do I emanate calm, clear, trustworthy authority?
I'm delighted that we've got 2 minutes in and had a philosophical reference from you, Pat. Otherwise, my heart.
I have a reputation both to live up to and bear down.
Just so. Health. Now, this was something that the polls picked up on. The Sunday Herald had this as its front page lead.
Well, you paid me £200 this morning to be your personal press agent. That's because not only am I delightedly talking about your book later on in the programme, but I actually read spontaneously without you even asking me, although the cheque is lovely, an article you wrote in the Scotsman this morning about Alex Salmon's new declaration of Arbroath pledging to protect the NHS from privatisation and create a fairer society. I think it's fascinating the way this has come to the front, because I think it's come from movement activity. Anybody who's part of this process knows Philippa Whitford, the great NHS breast cancer surgeon, and her fantastic dissemination of the case for defending the NHS by a yes vote, rather than the usual case being, we have the NHS, what are you complaining about? And she's made a brilliant point about saying there are fundamentally different models at work here. I think the next frontier in this argument is the inspirational argument, which is to say, yes, we're doing it differently here. Look at the way you're doing it in England. Be the progressive beacon. So I think that progressive beacon element of this is really quite strong, and I think it plays to the better angels of Scots political nature, but I think it also is very important for generating goodwill throughout the island. And I think on these kinds of issues, saying we're going to set a flag in the progressive direction, let's all travel towards that. I think this is great ground for the Yes campaign.
This is what I've been kind of feeling for a while, and I was thinking about it this morning and think it sort of gets summed up for me like this, which is there are two big aspects of the independence debate. One is how independence will work, the nuts and bolts of it if it's achieved, but the other is the reason for it in the first place. Now, the currency, all these ones play to the how will it be achieved. That's actually unknowable in some respects, because it takes two to tango. It takes negotiations, and the UK government won't pre-negotiate. So actually that one it's not a very easy one to discuss. And because we keep getting sucked into, nonetheless, that currency debate, we ain't having this one, which is the reason we're even here in the first place. And that's what I would love to see in the next debate. I would love to see Alex stand his ground more on this, the reasons that we're here. And I think this health thing is interesting, because I know that it's been said in the past that the reason that we should worry us that the NHS is being privatised in England, and the person who's saying that is actually Labour's shadow health secretary, Andy Burnham. We're getting that. The reason we should be worried is not so much because our cash will be affected directly, because actually it seems, according to the National Health Action Party that was set up by doctors to defend it, that this is so chaotic, this privatisation south of the border, they're spending more money on it, which means our share of the cash has actually risen. It's the whole philosophy behind what's happening there that worries me, and I was trying to talk about.
No, that's true, but there's an interesting thing there's a word that Jim Sellers has reintroduced into the discussion about why we should have independence, and it's audacity. And he goes back to Nib Evans' concept of audacity. If you're a socialist, or if you want radical reform, you have to be audacious, and to be audacious is to think differently. And so the idea of building up one's confidence in the Scottish worldview that you can have a publicly run health service, that there's no concept such as market failure, the great concept of market failure, which presumes that anything that's public is only public because the markets haven't been able to come in and replace that. So to actually pluck those concepts out of Scottish government common sense and be confident about what you're trying to build, you're the woman who does the Northern Nordic comparisons brilliantly and extensively. But I think there's just a wee bit of smedum, I think is the old Scots word. A bit of social democratic smedum is kind of what I would love. We'd all love Salmon to kind of come forth with.
Yeah, because in the end, the thing that I'm really kind of trying to say about health, and I think this is what people would just intuitively know, is that, we've had a long time where the Scots have really measured health by how many A&E departments they're close to, and that is hopeless. Health is a product of equity and respect and control over your circumstances. True. And these things are the things that have been lost down south by a sort of devil take the hindmost, winner takes all total philosophy to me. So, and that's the sort of thing that Harry Burns has been speaking about, the former Chief Medical Officer. So all of that is the health side of things. Doubtless we'll be hearing more about that. But that's the papers for this morning. So we roll on now to our first guest.
Yes, first guest is, I'm very, very delighted to welcome. Should I be staring at a camera? Tell me which camera I should be staring at.
There's deep in the darkness.
Tell me. Wave your hand, that one over there.
Yes.
Fine. Hello. Waiting thousands, millions, tens. I'm very, very delighted to welcome a friend of mine, actually, who has commissioned me for The Guardian for many years and is a guru of op-ed commissioning on that great paper. But she's been sent up to Scotland to report on her home patch, a West End girl, I believe, and to kind of basically sample the kind of street-level, community-level feel of the independence campaign. So would you please welcome to this bit of the couch here from The Guardian, Libby Brooks. Hello, Libby. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Are you the most well-travelled person in Scotland at the moment? Have you got a map of Scotland?
I get the sense that everybody is pretty well-travelled in Scotland these days. But I'm doing my best.
But you have a plan. You have an agenda. Yeah, to get out and about and talk to people and cover things. So, how has it been? You've been here for about 4 or 5 weeks or something, or 2 months?
No, a wee bit more, 3 months now. Yeah.
So what does it feel like?
I mean, I suppose the main thing that I would say is that coming back here has been a huge exercise in humility for me as a journalist. I think I kind of arrogantly assumed that I knew what was going on here and that I was following it closely from London, and really being back here is just like turning the telescope around 180 degrees. So it has been a steep learning curve.
What's your biggest point of... What's the one thing that you thought you came up that you knew about that you turned out that you didn't know about?
I think I had a kind of a rough sense of the campaign itself. I mean, the campaign at street level, at grassroots level, and I didn't have the sense of the kind of differentiation as well between the yes camp and the no camp, and that's sort of, I don't need to tell you, is sort of very clear, sort of coming up and going around and speaking to people.
And as a journalist for The Guardian, getting that more complex understanding of the thing, that you must feel quite a sense of responsibility to convey that. I mean, that has to be your agenda. I am going to convey the complexity of this, as against the latest Steve Bell cartoon that basically has Alex Salmond's tartan bottom sitting on top of Gordon Brown's Union Jack waistcoat or something. I mean, not that I don't love Steve Bell. He's great.
Everybody loves Steve.
Everybody loves Steve Bell, but there must be a bit about what's your journalistic agenda? Is that really it? Is to try and get as much nuance into the paper as possible?
Well, I mean, obviously, let's not forget as well that we have got an extraordinary and very accomplished Scottish correspondent up here already, Severn Carell.
That's my second salute of the
day. Who is going great guns, and obviously he is inevitably very tied to Holyrood at the moment, and so the kind of lovely job that I have got is to kind of get out a bit more and sort of go to smaller meetings out and about the place, and sort of actually sort of talk to people who are organising in their local areas, and I suppose the thing that kind of strikes me most is that I keep encountering people who are doing things that they have never done before.
Welcome to our world, Libby.
And what kind of things
that
they've not done before?
Whether that's just very basically going to a meeting, having a political conversation. I mean, I remember going sort of very early on, going to a Better Together meeting, actually, the launch of Better Together Creef, and seeing this kind of fairly austere, demographic of, you know, kind of older ladies and gentlemen who I think would really kind of have been beside themselves at the idea of sort of talking about politics in public at any other moment. But there was something about this question and this referendum campaign that actually sort of had them out there getting involved. And, you know, obviously on the yes side as well, you've got people who, who are organising and, you know, getting very, very involved where, you know, they've never been, never felt included before. And
Sure.
I think it is that sort of sense of inclusiveness. And I suppose in terms of the difference between the two campaigns as well, David, I was interviewing the playwright David Gregg the other week, and he was saying to me, there's a lot of saluting going on. He was saying to me, you know, there is a reason why the yes side is noisier, and it's you know, it's first of all because we are in a position where we need to be noisy, just in terms of getting that point across, but also that it is an issue that generates noise and energy and enthusiasm. And I think certainly, you know, in terms of the criticisms that have been made of the pro-union campaign, it always comes back to not making a sufficiently positive case for the union, not making that emotional case for the union.
But have you had any difficulties? I know that some of the wider press have said this to me, that because there's a kind of interest in appearing even-handed, you end up having to sort of find, to be blunt, no campaigns to report upon in the same proportion as the yes ones, just to look like you've got a balance, when I think everyone will now concede there is no balance actually in the numbers, at least, of that.
I haven't found it too taxing. I mean, you just go on the Better Together website and you can find a Blether Together meeting in Helensburgh that you take yourself off to. I mean, it's not rocket science. And yes, and, you know, yes, of course, there are more, you know, on a daily basis, there are more yes events and campaigns to go to. I think one just, you know, tries to be judicious and, you know, exercise some discretion.
We've both done a lot of campaigning on our sides, but one of the things that surprised me is the difficulty of having a community-based proper debate between the sides. And most of the debates that I've done with no opposition has been at quite a high level. I mean, I did something for the SURF, which is the Urban Regeneration Network in Scotland, and I was having a proper substantive debate with Gordon Matheson about the future of Scotland. What my experience is that there's people piling into Better Together meetings, and the no's and the undecideds are invited along, or the yeses and the undecideds are invited along. Same thing for the Yes Scotland campaign, and it works out about a third, a fourth, a fifth of people that come along to what is basically an enthusiastic kirk. So it's not so much, I find them not so much preaching to the converted as preaching to the converters, and that's there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, because you've got to motivate people. But do you find that as a lot? There's not that much flighting in the same room.
Yes, definitely, and yeah, I mean that is an issue. I mean, I think like you say, sort of particularly for sort of more yes-oriented meetings, it is about. I mean, let's not forget that, you know, even, you know, yes and no are on a scale, as, you know, Stephen Noon would tell you, and so, you know, those kind of softer yeses, you know, are maybe coming to the meetings to become more convinced, have arguments that they then want to bring to their friends and neighbours, and so it's. Yeah, I mean, there's a serious purpose to that.
I just think we're not quite as advanced. It could be just a wee bit more advanced. We could electoral reform commission, someone could have come in and said, you know what, I'm going to hold the ring here and compel you to sit in front of 800 people in Crieff or Coatbridge and also have a well-conducted debate as well. I mean, I just think it all happens at the level of the media spectacle, but it doesn't come down.
Some of that, though, is because civic society has been very scared to sort of even get involved, to be the ringmaster. Because, I mean, I've been involved in debates like that, and where somebody has absolutely taken it by the scruff of the neck and said, we want this to happen and we're going to squire it and we want you to come, then they have managed to kind of get everybody in the same room, and it's been quite a good go. But most communities are really quite nervous of doing that. And it would have to be said, the number of places I've been where people have said, and I know I would say this, wouldn't I, that they couldn't get Better Together speakers. That's been legion. And I think there's a bunch at the top who are willing to travel, and that's okay if you can book them. After that, you're struggling.
Yeah.
I want to raise one more thing, and look at Pat, he did too. But I think I just got in first.
I think you did.
Which was today's
That's a tight
paper.
grip. That's a tight grip on an arm.
Today's paper, my dear.
Yes.
Because I was ploughing through all the papers and I came to The Guardian and thought, there's nothing about the Scottish debate. It's 1 month to go. Did I forget to mention that? Or is it 1 month to go?
The door's there, Libby, if you want to escape.
No, we're cool.
Yeah, so why is there nothing except, it would have to be said, the only thing to do with Scotland is this 2-page pictures of folk at the Edinburgh Festival, which is delightful.
Isn't that lovely?
Is that because you guys have got a different 1 month to go, or what is it? Do these sometimes these dates are awfully arid?
Arbitrary, yes. I mean, I think sort of specifically on 1 month to go, I do think that's sort of fairly arbitrary and something that the BBC has come up with this morning, and that's fine because it suits them. You could equally argue that it's Thursday.
Which I take it is when the Guardian's month to go starts.
Maybe.
Okay.
And you know, you're being a little bit old school about what's being covered, because I did spend yesterday afternoon writing a piece about polling, the new declaration of Arbroath, the health service and so forth, and it's on the internet right now. But obviously, I take your point.
Do you ever have any sort of difficulties? Because, I mean, The Guardian doesn't editionalise. Just to explain to people, I mean, a lot of the other London-based press really can manage to put a kilt on things by effectively having an edition with maybe one journalist who writes something so it looks like a Scottish edition. Because The Guardian's decided always not to do that.
Yes, I mean,
so
it's...
you have to fight for your right to party with Scottish stories against everything else that's happening in the UK for everyone in the whole UK to read.
Yes, exactly. And yes, that is a frustration, and that is why I thank my stars that the internet exists now, so that we can, you know, I think we do sort of very well web-wise, and in fact it's the web that allows me to do all of the reporting that I'm doing on smaller events, because, you know, inevitably, I mean, they wouldn't get into a Scottish paper, let alone The Guardian, but, you know, there is space for that online.
Well, all I wonder is, to wrap this up, all I'm trepidant about is that you haven't found your Scottish version of Edward Snowden. I don't even want to know that someone's going to come along with a data stick and unravel one side or the other's political perspective. But unfortunately, we're not in a Socratic dialogue. This woman's been waving a finger at me. Could you please praise, accolade, Lesley? Libby Brooks.
What's my name? Thank you.
So we move seamlessly. I'm trying to think of how to construct a link. There's not a really very obvious one, but perhaps one of the places that Libby has been is Dundee. I hear nothing from offstage, so I'll take that as a big yes.
That'll do.
In which city we often find our following guest, Bryan Beattie. Can you give it up for Bryan Beattie? Now,
seamless, Lesley. Seamless.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so. Bryan, I feel I've known Bryan forever, but it probably wasn't been quite that long. You and I were both involved in starting a wee party for the elections, the first Scottish elections, which was the Highlands and Islands Alliance, and it fielded job share candidates, which we thought was a good idea.
A whole political party.
Yes. Just standing in the Highlands area, and it was completely trounced.
Yeah. But it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yes.
And it was 1999. We had our own parliament. Things seemed like there were going to be a big rosy future. Any similarities?
What were you allied about?
Well, we were trying to... There's a big independent tradition, obviously, in the Highlands. And we were trying to find a way of representing that. Huh? But of course, as soon as you grasp that, the bloom is shed. So there was a wee bit of a conundrum there. But yeah, no, the whole job share thing was great. Cool. And in the new Scotland, can I just say that? I mean, I think the Nova Scotia. I think you two, a job share for the president of the new Scotland would be absolutely fantastic.
Do you want to?
Could you hear that?
You see that?
Do you want to exacerbate the immigration problem even more than it actually is?
I should say as well that Bryan can easily move into any number of voices, he being one of the best mimics I've ever come across. I am holding out for your Mr. Kipling voice at one point in this interview, but I suppose at a sensible level I should say that you're nonetheless an expert advisor on culture, which is kind of one of the main reason that you're here today. Yeah. You've been advising 2 ministers of culture from way back, different administrations, and been involved in, you're strategic advisor to the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland.
Yes. And,
which used to be the RSAMD for all of us in old money.
Right, yeah.
Are people taking to the new posh name?
Well...
okay, we'll just... diplomacy.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fine.
But
anyway, Dundee.
Dundee, yes.
Also, you copied MIT's logo as well.
Let's
deliberate?
safely to Dundee.
Was it your idea?
Because, actually, there's so many things here. I can't actually manage to go through all of them. But the one thing, the consultancy that you've got has been working for a long time, particularly in Dundee, where you come from. I should just put my hands up and say I'm actually a Dundee ambassador, even though I don't live there, because I worked there for quite a long time and love it as a city. I'm just thinking, it's an interesting thing that Dundee seems to be really coming into its own at the moment. It was actually, you were also very involved with the bid for the City of Culture bid that failed, and it went to Hull in the end. In a funny kind of way, because Dundee was actually doing too well to need that kind of accolade, perhaps.
Well, that's exactly the feedback that we got, which was kind of bittersweet to get that. We were told, actually, by both the judges and the people who judged it independently, that the Dundee bid was the strongest bid, but they felt that Hull needed it more, the accolade would make more of a difference. And in some way, that's great, because it kind of means that Dundee is on that journey, which is, during the course of the bid, that's what we were telling them, that Dundee has been on a journey. And like many other post-industrial cities in the UK, far less Scotland, it hasn't had its problems to seek, and still does have, endemic social problems. But yet, that kind of coming out of that, you can see a direct parabola with the investment in culture at the same time, right back from those who know Dundee or have been aware of Dundee to a community play production called Witch's Blood back in the 80s, which was the first time really that the Dundee Rep, the theatre of the city, had actually gone to the citizens of the city and said, "Come on, we'll do something together." And folk felt that kind of sense of empowerment. Now, that sounds a wee bit kind of grandiose, but even now, people will refer back to that.
Very true.
And there was a cadre of people that got involved at that community level that are still involved. That was their entree into getting involved, not necessarily in cultural life, although some did, but into community life. And that the notion of the difference that culture can make, both individually and at community level, was exactly the sort of thing that we were trying to emphasise as part of the bid, could be writ large by such an accolade.
But there are three other reasons why you shouldn't have got the bid. Oh. It's because the culture in Dundee comes from brilliant places. One story I know, Chris van der Kuyl, the video games guru, saying basically the reason why the city was so ahead in games is because people were nicking Sinclair ZXs from the backs of vans and hacking around with them, like so semi-criminal. Two, you've got the cartoon capital of the known universe in terms of DC Thompson. So I know it's hidden behind a wall and nobody can get out, and people are fed through tubes, but nevertheless, they're making
columnist, I beg to differ.
And then you have, of course, it's a fantastic institution, and then you have rock and roll. Rock and roll, which people. And again, those are three commercial. Street level activities, so not just your commissioning, V&A and all the rest of it, but the energy is really, really there.
Well, it absolutely is. But as ever with these sorts of things, and the purpose of going for City of Culture, it's about confidence. It's about letting people know that what they do is valuable and valued, even if it's only valued by themselves, but that it's legitimate as well. And Glasgow, of course, did it famously in 1990, and other cities have done it again. But Dundee has been doing it pretty consistently, actually. I mean, at the end of the 90s, or the mid-90s, when Dundee was really at its nadir in terms of its economy and all the rest of it, it chose to invest in a contemporary arts venue and build the DCA. Now, that flies in the face of all. Can you imagine being a councillor in that debate and having to rationalise why you are putting money into contemporary art, not just a piece, but a building, rather than into any of the social services? That's really ballsy. And it's continued that kind of ballsiness throughout. And bringing the V&A was another piece of ballsiness. And that confidence... and that growing confidence begins to seep through, I think, and that of course makes the difference to any city, and it's great that its cultural life kind of leads on that.
But the cultural life aids and abets the economic life, because if you're trying to bring smart people over to do life sciences or whatever, if they feel there's a cultural hinterland, they'll move.
One of the CEOs of one of the companies, and I'm trying to remember which one it was, came over, and he was kind of being headhunted from, I can't remember if it was Las Vegas or somewhere, pretty good to be. And actually, he came over.
He
came over and found that there was a guitar festival on, because there was a Dundee guitar festival, which I think sadly has drifted off to Glasgow, but we need to get it back. But that was his big thing, because he was a big blues guitar fan. And there was a French film festival on at the DCA, which was his wife was French. And just in that moment, walking along the fabulous vista of the Tay, watching dolphins leap, I kid you not, they really do, and knowing that you've got the best ice cream in the universe in Broughty Ferry, I won't publicise it, but it's Versace's, you sort of think to yourself, what is not to like about this place? But here's one question, difficult one for you, because this is, after all, Referendum TV. Dundee is also known as Yes Town, because all the polling by the Dundee Courier has revealed that people intend to vote yes in Dundee. I know we shouldn't count any chickens before they're hatched and so on. Is there a connection?
Jinx.
Jinx is the right word to use.
Jinx.
Province Help My Bob is also available.
They were on the trip. I don't know, actually. I never thought of putting the two together. I mean, if that, again, if it's a kind of a connection between that kind of gallousness or confidence or self-discovery, possibly, or the ability. There was a poll taken just by STV. Are you allowed to mention the alternative TV company?
Yes,
God bless them.
The end of the November last year, which was the end of the City of Culture process, and it said, and it polled 1,000 people in Dundee. What do you like most about the city? What words would you use to describe it? Number 2 was cultural. Now, I'm willing to bet that 12 months previously, before the whole kind of City of Culture thing had started, if it had appeared at all, it wouldn't have appeared as number 2. So that kind of just reminding people, reflecting back to them what they have and what they can do during that period, I think resulted in that. And maybe it has gone on to do that.
And obviously number 1 is seagulls.
Of course it was, yeah. What else? Pez, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you so much for all of that, Bryan. I think you're going to have to budge along the sofa at the moment, because you're going to have an exciting guest, probably coming on that side, I would say, just as a sort of small predictor. Take it away.
Sure. The most exciting guest we could conceivably have. That one there? Hello. The most exciting guest we could conceivably have. Not only have we covered high culture, tech culture, old media, we now have parody media. We now have one of the best Scottish parodies that has been put out since Phil Differs started working for the comedy unit in 1974. Is that right? Yes. Could you please welcome to the stage, otherwise known as AKA Lady Alba, Dr. Zara Gladman. Give her a cheer up. Welcome, polymathic lady.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So the Bad Romance was just, what does it feel like to be a proper subcultural icon for people to be sharing you all over the place, copying your clothing style? How does it feel?
Are they?
Yes.
Are they copying me?
In the streets, in the many, many streets of Scotland, urban and rural.
Pretty weird, pretty surreal. I don't really think about it too
really?
much.
Really? Do you not? Have you been accosted in the street yet? Because that's the ultimate test.
I've had the odd random person, but I think because I have the Bowie makeup on, like, it's kind of like a disguise. So sometimes I feel like I'm leading a bit of a double life.
That's true. I mean, Lady Gaga herself probably just staggers about Manhattan looking like a bag lady. So, yeah.
For those of us who are not down with kids enough to know what this is all about yet, well, there may be somebody out there who knows, back in the old land. You've done a kind of a different version of Lady Gaga's Bad Romance. How did you get to thinking about that, and what do you do?
Yeah, well, I wanted to do something fun for the Yes campaign, and I'd done a wee bit of comedy before. I'd done a parody of a Katy Perry song a while ago that was about a night out in Glasgow. So when it came round to me thinking about what to do, I thought I'll do another parody, and I thought of Bad Romance by Lady Gaga, and a lot of people might say that Scotland's relationship with the Union is a bit of a bad romance. So that was the kind of thinking behind that, and then I just rewrote the lyrics, coerced a bunch of pals to help me, and made a video and put it on YouTube. And lots of people watched it, which was awesome.
But people that's what the indie culture is an exemplar of. People are just doing it and then sticking it out. And it's obviously the technology and it's the platforms that enable that, but there's also a certain oomph that's just coming up from everywhere.
There's a lot of DIY. I mean, there's no point waiting around for the official campaign to do something. Like, just do it yourself if you've got an idea.
As a board member of Yes Scotland, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. And the internet's a great thing for that. It gives everyone a voice. Social media, so anyone can get involved that way.
You did inspire the I Want to Break Free video from National Collective, which did a kind of male tranny riff on the famous Queen video, which is one of the most life-enhancing things I think I've seen in Scottish
I knew
media.
a few of the guys in that video, so I enjoyed that particularly. Yeah.
Lovely looking men.
They are very attractive people.
Very
National Collective.
Focused activists.
Yeah, hotties for indie.
Now Pat will kick himself if he doesn't remember in all this sort of memory lane that he's now wandering into, that he wants to talk about
talking about
science.
the future. I beg your pardon.
Science.
Yes, desperate to talk about science, because you are not only are you a PhD in ecology. Do I have that right? But you are also the public engagement officer at the Glasgow Science Festival, and I asked you just beforehand to have a wee think, because my thing is, top-level politicians talk about how great it is that we do science, innovation, technology. It's one of the great assets we want to tell the world. I don't think we tell a good story about it at all.
Yeah, I mean, in my job on a daily basis, I basically try and help scientists share what they do with the public and try and get the public interested in science. And on a daily basis, I meet so many amazing people who are doing awesome research that people don't know about. I mean, my flatmate, he's writing up just now, so he's kind of in a dark place, but his PhD is about puffins. And he spends his summers in the Hebrides camping out for a few months just watching puffins. So, there's lots of cool stuff happening in our universities and Scottish science. Scotland's famous for its science. So, we need to get those stories out there.
But the crisis, I mean, Libby's just been on, but media is the problem, the answer and the problem here. So what's interesting is I wonder how we address it. Because we've been addressing it through campaigning by making our own. Don't bemoan the media, become the media.
Yeah.
But I guess after yes, if there is a yes, is there any way we can make an argument for saying we need a Scottish science and innovation programme or some channel, whether it's online, offline broadcast? I mean, we need to put to some degree, we need to put our money where our mouth is in terms of informing, empowering the citizenry about this absolutely crucial aspect of going forward.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, science festivals are a great way
of
doing that.
Yeah.
So already there's Glasgow Science Festival, there's Edinburgh Science Festival, there's one in Dundee. So there are science festivals, but I think there needs to be more of that. And actually, in my job at the moment, we're working on a community project where we're trying to take science into hard to reach places, particularly in Glasgow, in more deprived areas where people wouldn't necessarily come along to a science festival. So it's quite a new project, but I would love to see more of that, more community science going on, and citizen science as well. There's a huge potential for people to go and collect their own data and be part of big studies and contribute to them. So.
Well, I was in the position, slightly in a similar position, because for 3 years I was involved with the marine energy project that the EU set up with 61 scientists, engineers and developers across 11 countries, and I was supposed to be trying to get the message out about why marine energy was slow to be kind of coming forward. Now that was difficult because scientists have got this tremendous rigour about needing to get the apostrophe in the right place, never mind anything else. And trying to actually put something interesting out was really sometimes quite difficult. Like you couldn't G it up. In the end, we did films. We did constantly films because that just showed what was happening rather than trying to explain it. It was show, don't tell, I guess. And that seemed to be a great way forward. And out of that, my big hope was, now this is me really going back to the future, was that we could have How on television. And now, does anybody remember How? Fred Dinage. Do you remember Fred Dinage? And who were the other ones? Bunty.
I've met Bunty.
Have you?
Bunty lives just north of Helmsdale.
Right. Well,
she's remarkable.
We could get a new, and it was just a quiz thing where these 4 people were on, and they showed how things work, just right there and then. And it was a tremendous programme, and it was really popular. So, why couldn't we have that? Mick, how?
but the media thing. I mean, one of the media is the problem as well as the solution. But one of the sadder things about the white paper is it says very, very little about anything on the cultural side, and the broadcasting channel that it suggests is it's old broadcasting. Instead of looking at the kind of microjournalism or the puffin counting channel or whatever you want to.
Voters for yes.
Exactly, but there's an opportunity, given the number of folk that are around in new media in Scotland, to do something entirely different and very, very exciting in terms of broadcast that would allow that and create those sort of opportunities.
Channel 4 had a thing called 4IP, which they kind of cancelled at some point. But that was basically an innovation fund to put into something. And I think there's been so much new media innovation coming out of this campaign. I would love us to look at that. I'd love us to think, okay, we're not just going to take all the £350 million and just put it towards another version of what's down in Bush House. We can actually look at some of that and maybe try and support, because National Collective and the vigour of it and the inventiveness of it is exactly what we should be celebrating, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we all agree, so we've got to stop. But anyway,
the
thank you very
fabled
much.
Scottish consensus kicks in again. Yeah.
The lady and the gent. Now, if we've had a lady and a gent, what does that make Phil Differ? The comedy genius. Could you please welcome our next guest, Phil Differ? Now
this is actually like one of my stand-up gigs, but with an audience. Huge audience. Thanks for coming.
I was going to say that the speed of your entrance suddenly had me thinking through that old moniker, never hurry a Murray, they're too good to hurry.
All right.
But anyway, delighted that you're here.
Jack Hargreaves.
Yeah,
he was in How as well.
And there was another, was
John
there not 4?
Miller.
Right, there you are.
Right.
Would that work?
How sad
Is
am
that-
I that I could tell you the obscure ones?
It is.
Sit here, come closer to the microphone.
Yeah. Do you think that kind of programme would work? How? You see, everybody loves
No.
it. It's like Crackerjack. No, okay. So let's move on.
How
Phil,
about Maggie
comedy.
Philbin? And sorry, stop. Moving on. Move on.
Talk to us comedy-wise, because you've got a gig on at the moment. You've got MacBraveheart, which is a comedy review about all manners of things Scottish. When
It's
and where
not a
is it?
review, Lesley, it's a play.
Yeah.
God's sake.
I was actually review with a UE. at the end. That
Just
does not
because
sound
it hasn't
playwright.
been, just because it hasn't been reviewed in the Guardian. Please. That doesn't mean it's not a play. No, it's actually. How can I describe it? It's a cross between Macbeth and Braveheart and River City, I suppose. You know, it's just a kind of daft.
Covers the basis.
It covers everything, and it's not meant to be taken seriously by the audience. The idea is that the actors are taking themselves very seriously. It's about people taking things very, very seriously and being very earnest. And it's a as I say, it's a parody of Macbeth.
Right.
Braveheart.
Okay. And
You really need to go and see it.
Yeah, that's why I was asking exactly when and where, so that we can all get
It's
that
on at
locked in our brains.
the Assembly Rooms, Studio 1, 1:15 every day between now and Sunday.
That's why we haven't made it, because we're on here.
And you're
most
on
of the
here.
time.
You'll get a laugh at it. If nothing else, you'll get a laugh. Yeah, I guarantee it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, comedy. We've often had this said. I mean, it's been said a lot. You know, that artists seem to be generally pro yes. But actually, Pat was listing off the comedians before we came in here that we're a pretty impressive yes-leaning bunch. Do you see that? Well, in fact, list them off, Pat, since you did it, or can you now remember?
Well, you know, Frankie Boyle, Limmy, certainly Greg Hempel, and Kevin Bridges, Tommy Shepherd, as an impresario.
That's not a bad list, is it?
I'm quite surprised.
Whoever knows, and whoever are the best ones, I'll side with them. The best comedians, you know.
Oh, well, good. That's a nice, judicious
Billy,
answer. You can get away
Billy
with that.
Connolly and all that. Were they all?
Well,
Yeah.
Billy, I think, has beautifully lifted himself above it. You know, and I think given his own
I'm with Billy.
try it seriously.
I've not made up my mind, Pat. I haven't. I genuinely haven't. And the only thing I will say is, at the start of all this, I was very much a no and a punch in the table no, and I've gradually shifted. I wouldn't say I was a yes yet. That's not ruling it out. And but I'm not a no banging on the table anymore. So somewhere along the line, the argument has been working, or the yes. The no. Oh, I'm getting all mixed up now.
Is this anything
One
to
of
do
them
with your
is-
own? I'm just always interested in how that shifting starts to happen. I mean, have you within your own family unit got yesers or
No,
not really?
they're all no's. My
Are they
family are all
still
no's.
banging the table?
No, they're just casual no's.
Right.
You know, just nah. You know, they're just kind of that. But most of the comedians, you're absolutely right. Most of them are for they're yesers, and they try and persuade you, sort of thing. You know,
Right, so they've been nibbling away, have they?
I suppose they probably have, and you're amongst them all the time. And my thing, I'm always very open-minded in these things. I would say to them, well, tell me why, and let them tell me. And if they've got some good ideas, then I'll take them on board. I think I think basically on an emotional level, I'm a yes person, but I'm a big fearty at heart, and I'm getting older, and I'm worried, and I'm frightened of change. I think that's it. And if it goes, if it is a yes, then I'll say, right, let's go for it. You know, I'm not going to be. And the number of friends of mine who have said the first thing that will happen if we vote yes is I'll be out the travel agent and I'll be getting out of here and all that. I mean, if I had £1 for every time I've heard that, I'd have about £3. But
is that because they're not saying it, or you don't have many friends?
No, I don't have many friends, you know. But that attitude is just ridiculous, you know, when they come to the extremes of that. So if we go for it, we go for it, and you just embrace it and get wired in. That's what I think.
The thing I wanted to ask you about was, I mean, you go on the web and you look for a bit of entertainment at lunchtime, and in the last couple of weeks I've been going to old I Am Jolly sermons.
Aye.
And that sort of the comedy unit, or at least comedy through television, has been one of these kind of, I think, quite unheralded ways in which Scottish street vernacular culture was sort of kept alive. I mean, linguistically. I mean, there was a certain point in the media sphere where the only place you would actually hear something that sounded like the way you were talking to your pals in the street was to listen to something coming out of the comedy unit. Now, I know there was no McDermottian programme sitting pushing it forward, but did you have a sense that that's what you were to some degree doing?
I think we did. At that time, it all started with Naked Radio, right, which we used to do along at, I'm taking my bearings here, along at Edinburgh, the old BBC. And we couldn't get an audience because it was Gregor Fisher, Tony Roper, Lindsay Smith. Nobody had heard of them.
Yeah, no hopers.
They were like, we'll see what they're like. You think they're doing. And the writers we were a bit like that as well. But with Naked Radio, we got our voice. We were allowed, because it was a Scottish comedy programme, and the sketches reflected Scottish way of life, and the characters reflected. And the very first Nesbitt sketch, there was a character called Danny Baird. And Ian Pattison, who writes Nesbitt, brilliantly wrote this monologue, and the guy described himself as the suit, the string vest, the bandage, all that sort of thing. And the response, you were actually, as you say, Pat, the people were hearing the things they heard every day, and the discussions that they heard, and the language that they heard, and the words that they heard, whatever, and really hooked into that. So when we kind of went on to Naked Video, although we were working for a network, it was still very strongly Scottish, and I was always quite proud of that, that we could be Scottish but still hit the big audience.
But there's a thing you say in your book about humour, which I thought which struck me. I'm going to be talking to Lesley about humour, about a book next, Blossom. But that way that humour is pleasurable, it's that kind of with the sphincter twitching on the velvet. I think that's the phrase you once described it to me as. If the sphincter twitches on the velvet, then we know we've got a good joke, isn't that? Doesn't that a lovely lunchtime thought?
Yes, aye. Sorry about that.
That's okay. But it's a laughter in the dark sometimes. Because if you felt like a powerful people, just to kind of be crude about it. One of the things, I love Jewish humour, for example. There's a website called Old Jews Telling Jokes, which is a fantastic website, but it's all survival humour.
Aye, absolutely.
And to some degree, Scottish humour is survival humour. It's like, I'll hit myself in the face first before you hit me in the face.
No, you're absolutely right. Right. I mean, you mentioned I Am Jolly, Ricky Fulton, the late great, and like not to get too heavy in Ricky's, but when Ricky was 16, 17, the ship he was on, the war, it was torpedoed, and he was like 6 days in the water, swimming, waiting to be picked up.
Really?
Oh, aye. Wow. Oh, it's terrible. I mean, and no, when he come to write the book, I think all the survivor's guilt came out, and it was quite, I used to spend many hours with Ricky talking about it and getting really upset about it. But one of the things he said was, you'd be swimming about and you'd meet a guy, and you'd say, where are you going? He says, well, I'm going to swim out there and see if I can get a bus to Partick and all that. And even in that situation, he says there was humour and joke. And he goes, well, I'll see you later on. I'll maybe get you a pint, and away he'd go. He lost, I don't know, many of his friends, what have you. But the humour, there's the example of it, and that and you're contemplating your own mortality, but you're still able to crack a gag. Very Scottish thing.
I think there's a thing as well, because there was one thing I did mention, which was to me that the kind of some of the ultimate Scottish moments. I was away cycling in the middle of nowhere in the Highlands, and I'd been cycling for 2 hours, hadn't seen anybody, and then in the distance I could see one guy with a rucksack and a dog. And so I was preparing something, and I think this is the point. You know that you're going to have an interaction. There's lots of countries you go to, and it wouldn't mean anything to you. You wouldn't anticipate it. But I was anticipating it. Got up to him and said, to him, "It's a shame the dog can't help you with a rucksack." He said, "You should see him knocking the tent pegs." Like that. I was like, straight past him in 10 seconds.
Totally spontaneous. It's not like he's been sitting waiting and going, "Here's Lesley Riddoch coming, I've got one later." It would be like that, and I always find that really, really funny. At the Commonwealth Games, which we had in Glasgow, have you heard of them? Edinburgh, yeah. Huge success. It was the guys, they brought a lot of kind of happy, jolly English people to meet folk and go, high five and all that sort of thing. Have a great games. And it's the Scottish guy, the Glasgow guys, you're passing in, they're going, "Have a great games, mate." Have a great games. They've got to do it, but they're still holding on to that bit of dignity sort of thing.
In the midst of service capitalism.
Have a great games, mate. I hope you enjoy it. So, no.
Anyway, when's say your thing again? Date, time, please. 10 seconds.
It's the Assembly Rooms, 115 Studio A. It's called MacBraveheart, the other Scottish play, and it's a very important play.
It's important. Thank you, Ernie Wise. I mean, sorry. Mr. Biffer, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Hello there. Well, now I have been actioned, as they say in corporate life, to interview Lesley, and delightedly so, about her book Blossom. What the subtitle is, "What It Takes for Scotland to Flourish."
Yeah, what Scotland needs to flourish.
Needs to flourish. And I think you were sort of saying, and I can quite agree with you, that if we've got our own television show, it would be nice to kind of get you to talk a wee bit more elaborately beyond the usual punch and judy topics that we have to deal with when we're talking about the independence referendum. And I read it. I've been reading it over the period, but I read it tonight. I read it this morning. It's a brilliant book. I would recommend anybody buys it on Kindle or from the shops. But one of the things that struck me about it was that you have such an emphasis on empowerment, i.e. people in a kind of daily level, Scottish life, taking control of their own conditions, and that's the bigger question to answer than necessarily the independence question. And how do you feel that message? I mean, in terms of promoting the book, send it, talk to people around it, and communities, how do you feel that message? Are people picking up on that message? And what do you think, if they picked up on that message, what would the actual consequences be? What would Scotland be like if it was a deeply empowered place? What would people do? What would be the surprising, startling things that they would do?
Well, the surprising, startling thing that would happen would be that the government would actually reflect what's happening on the ground, which is that communities across Scotland are saving themselves. They always have been. One of the things that was most depressing to kind of do in researching a lot of things was to realise consistently how often the people who'd really made things work in Scotland have given their lives to something. Sometimes have been successful, like the people of Egg, for example. I was involved in that buyout. And they've come through the other end. They have demonstrably a better way of life, where their kids now live on Egg as a result of doing shared equity deals. This is not rocket science. It's giving bits of land to kids who can then together build houses, and if they then sell them at some point in the future, they give a portion of the money back to the Isle of Egg Trust to do it all over again. Well, what's not to like? So those people have been successful. Lots of people, however, have tried to do the same sort of thing to lift the community themselves. Like Tommy Riley, who set up the Drumchapel Men's Health Group, 1996. Very brave thing to do, because men helping themselves in a hard area like Drumchapel was kind of, a no-go zone. And he, with some other guys, set up this self-help group. Half of them gave up smoking through acupuncture. There was an 18-week waiting list for aromatherapy in Drumchapel. The most popular thing was cookery, because a lot of the guys realised they didn't have jobs anymore, but they had jobs, they were fathers, so they could learn to be doing something to add value there. They had 40 trained volunteers at the end of 1 year, but the health board felt that it was too hard to evaluate the project, and the money was discontinued. And when I was writing the book, I tried to get back in touch with Tommy to find out what had happened after that. He'd taken it very hard. He was the only person before that who wasn't abusing alcohol, if you want. He wasn't. He was never a drinker. He became an alcoholic after that thing went down the tubes. His wife and him split up, and he died last year of COPD completely prematurely. Now that story is the story, I would say, of every man is putting it too strongly, but it's a very consistent pattern in Scotland, particularly for guys who've tried so hard to change something. If the energy can't get out of you, where does energy go? And I think it can eat you up.
The question I want to ask, though, is some of the solutions that you suggest, which is in terms of people becoming literate about things like land or setting up housing cooperatives or becoming literate about energy or whatever it is. It's not as if there's like a university of empowerment that people can go and take courses in this. A lot of it is kind of street level daily wisdom, doing it by mistakes and by sort of blundering around. But that story you've just said, the state pulled their funding. So the state has certain priorities that are obviously not supporting this culture, this blossoming self-determinist culture that you're talking about. How could they change that language of priorities, given the way that we talk about politics and politics as usual and business as usual is, you got to earn so you can pay the taxes so that you pay for the services, and the process of earning is by selling, retailing, buying stuff, what Tim Jackson calls business, the sustainability guy calls business as usual. That model is very, very strong, and when people hear you talking, they think Findhorn, alternative, too hard. When I walk through my daily life, that's too demanding. I can't get into that alternative
There's 2 things
space.
to say about that. It is too demanding. People are burning out right, left and centre because what's happening in Scotland is there's a two-speed society. There's the official set of things that often don't work, don't reach people properly, and then there's all the community stuff that's grown up with no funding very much of the time, which has grown up to try and plug the gaps left by the official structures. What we've got actually in Scotland, Britain is a top-down society. Scotland is no different. It's got a lot of very ingrained ideas that the top comes, the professionals at the top are there to fix you, and your job is to sit still and be fixed. Now, anything that deviates too strongly from that just causes consternation. It's allowed for a small amount of time. It's allowed for a pilot. Personally speaking, I don't want to be involved in another pilot as long as I live in Scotland because we've got pilotitis. We know generally what works, but the confidence amongst politicians isn't there because actually the direction of trade has always been this way. Now, the great thing to me about the Yes campaign and the reason that I've been so involved in it is because this started off that way. It was the SNP party at a top-down level with an idea, and you could even say the Central Yes campaign has been a bit like that. Glory be, it ain't panned out that way because what's happened on the ground is people have really begun to get a sense of themselves. And that's the model, if you like, for where Scotland's been going for quite a long time, unrecognised by the media, the politicians and everywhere else. People have just started doing more and more heavy lifting themselves at community level. What I'd like is for the structures to start to reflect that so that we have smaller councils that fit actual communities, not great remote ones, for example.
But there's policy blossom as well as street level blossom. I mean, obviously the COSLA report in terms of trying to get local democracy at a more subsidiary level, at a kind of more empowered local level, is reacting to the discussion that Commonweal set off with its report, and your book's points about it as well. But the one thing, the late and dearly lamented Ailsa Mackay, whose counsel to Alex Salmond is credited as putting the childcare proposal into the actual white paper. I mean, she's a gateway drug. Her work is a gateway drug to lots of other stuff that it would address some of the questions about how we support people's genuine empowerment. But you talk to people about a citizen's income. You talk to people about a 30-hour work week, both of which are policies that Ailsa was consulting with on globally as an academic, and people just go, that's fringe stuff. So if you're in terms of finding a way to connect the top down and the bottom up. Now, how do we? I'm interested in both those policies, but I'm completely aware of how fringy they are.
We may run out of time before I finally get on here.
2 minutes. Go.
It's to look at other countries which have actually done this very successfully. I quite appreciate that in Britain and in Scotland, anybody who's talking about cooperatives is presumed to be, housing a sort of, dreadlocks and open-toed sandals. Anybody, and actually across the Nordics, all the papers that we have here, for example, are produced by 2 large Finnish cooperatives. All the pulp practically that goes into papers in the world comes from there. So you can manage this. The Nordics, I know people may get to a stage where they think, gosh, is there nowhere else? You could look at Germany. The average size of a municipality, a council in Germany, is 8,000 people. In Scotland, it's 115,000. The average size there is 15 square kilometres. The average size here is 990 square kilometres. So it's the actually successful countries of Europe, and this is probably the most important point to make, the most successful economies in terms of child well-being, in terms of AAA credit rating, strangely, they're all the small countries, all the Nordics and the properly federal countries. So it ain't just the weirdos on the margins who are saying, let's get grassroots, let's get small, let's get connected. If we could just stop looking for a minute constantly at the Anglo-Saxon model of this country and America, we would notice beside us that the examples are all thriving, and then we'd notice that it's what our own folk have been trying to do, actually, unreported and unthanked, for the best part of several centuries.
But a yes campaign is a yes to all that stuff, as well as a yes to a particular constitutional option. I mean, that's my hope. I'm sure that's yours,
so,
is that it's a yes to a lot of yeses, a lot of fields of activity.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, as soon as you start to kind of open up, personally, what I've found going around is that people like to discuss some of the elephants in the room. You know, the idea that everything in Scotland's brilliant, everything down the road is kind of problematic is just wrong. We know that. We know that actually if we just end up with new bosses, same as the old bosses in Scotland, we'll have failed. So I think when you begin to talk a bit more about that, people can feel a little more confident that we're not all just on message.
Have you felt articulated as an author now? Just a little bit more?
Very extremely well ventilated.
I think on that note,
we must leave it. So let me turn back to the camera to say one more thing about tomorrow's programme. Tomorrow we have the editor of Bella Caledonia, Mike Small, redoubtable man, who's also involved in the Scottish Independence Convention, and that's having a daily media campaign briefing over in Glasgow's CCA. They've kicked off today. We've got Alan Smith, MEP, and Tomek Barkoi, who are talking about Europe, Poland and Scotland, and we will be speaking to cast members from the comedy Fringe show, Mere Comedy, Referendum and Dumber, and no connection whatsoever. We'll also be speaking to the deputy editor of the Scotland on Sunday, Kenny Farquharson. So, there's a lot to be looking forward to tomorrow. One final word. We always say this, it may sound a bit clunky, but we would not be here without one man who is Sandy Adam of Springfield Properties in sunny Elgin. Due to his generosity, we have been. You can salute one last time on this programme, Pat Kane. Thanks to him, you have been watching Referendum TV.